They taught me everything, just like Daddy should, by Badwriterrr. Summary. Draco's perspective of his 6th year at Hogwarts, with mounting responsibilities and the terror of letting down his family, not to mention Potter just seems to be everywhere. Or, Drarry version of the Half-Blood Prince. Have fun, and as always, comments and constructive criticism are always wanted. The afternoon was slowly fading into early evening as the sky pinkened and darkened, and despite the magnificent view of the sprawling countryside, Draco couldn't think of any place he'd like to be less. Crabbe had grown restless, having finished the last of his sweets and already eyeing Pansy's 2 unopened pumpkin pasties with angling intrigue. In his head, Draco was passing the time betting with himself when Crabbe would make that harrowing leap to stick his grubby paws between Pansy's legs where the small orange sweets lay in waiting. Just as it seemed that Crabbe had prepared himself enough to have a go of it, the compartment door opened with a clatter and Blaze waltzed in. Draco looked up, sliding just out of Pansy's lap to watch the other boy enter. With some mocking amusement, Draco stared as Blaze fumbled and shut in the compartment door, muttering to himself as the thing rattled against his grip, before collapsing back in a heap next to Goyle, who, unlike Draco, seemed very unamused by the entire situation. Yawning, Draco collapsed back into Pansy, allowing her to continue methodically caressing his temple as he saw the sun catch the window of the compartment, flashing bright white for just a moment before vanishing into the heavens. Slightly perplexed, but brushing it off as a trick of the light, Draco tilted his head to address the new occupant. "What did Slughorn want?" he said with a cold sneer Draco deemed well-deserved, feeling somewhat snubbed that his new professor hadn't thought to invite him to any special gatherings. "Just trying to make up to well-connected people," said Blaze before pausing to glare at his nails. Not that he managed to find many. Again, Draco found himself rising out of Pansy's lap, just slightly, feeling a slight strain in his neck, dulled completely by the outrageousness of what he'd just heard. He was completely bewildered that Slughorn had simply forgotten about Hogwarts' most connected, richest, and dare Draco say, the most talented student. Who was invited? Blaze seemed to grin at this, his lips curling up just enough to flash his pearly teeth. "Oh, you know, McLaggen." Draco nodded at this. Fair. His family had its thumbs just about everywhere. "Some Ravenclaw called Belby." Pansy gasped and muttered something aghast. Despite this, Belby's fellow's insignificance to Draco. However, before he even had the chance to ask, Blaze spoke again. "Longbottom, Potter, and the girl Weasley." That hit like a bucket of frozen water. The horror, the dishonour. Honestly, who in their right mind would waste their time wanting to meet with Longbottom and the she-weasel? No self-respecting wizard would dare muddle themselves with brainless vermin and filth like them. Whether Slughorn was completely balmy or merely a blood traitor, Draco was none the wiser. Draco scowled, considering this before allowing himself to evaluate any more of his given information. Of course he'd be fumbling to fall to kiss the grubby boots of Saint Potter, who didn't. Draco made his concerns loud and clear to his housemates, who quite quickly began mocking the girl Weasley's looks, skills, and blood. "Word has it that our dearest Potter quite fancies her, actually," said Pansy with a malicious grin, elbowing Draco in the side and earning herself a sharp smack on the shoulder for her efforts. He should never have told that cow anything. Well, not like she'd given him much of a choice in the matter, drowning him in half her uncle's liquor cabinet until his tongue was loose enough to spill his deepest, darkest desires. With a huff, sticking his chin up at her, Draco sat up fully and glowered at the rest of them. "Well, I pity Slughorn's taste. Maybe he's gone a bit senile," said Draco with a sigh, leaning back against the uncomfortable couch seat, allowing himself to lament on the travesty of his exclusion. "Shame. My father always said he was a good wizard in his day. My father used to be a bit of a favourite of his. Slughorn probably hasn't heard I'm on the train, or I wouldn't bank on an invitation," said Blaze, with that same enticing, near malicious smile he'd inherited from his mother. "He asked me about Nott's father when I arrived. They used to be old friends, apparently. But when he heard he'd been caught up at the ministry, he didn't look happy, and Not didn't get an invitation, did he? I don't think Slughorn's interested in Death Eaters. Sometimes Draco forgot the only reason he kept Blaze around was because of his pretty face. It was a wonder he was even in Slytherin, given that he was baseless and goalless, with his only skill set related to flirting and making other people uncomfortable, which were not mutually exclusive. That, partnered with his low birth and blatant disrespect for his superiors, well, it's best to say that Blaze was just a pretty little pest. Furthermore, that dig was shameless. Blaze had no tact, no class. He had no clue who Draco was, how powerful and influential Draco would soon become. Even more than that precious little Potter. With a lazy sneer, he blinked slowly, a warning as clear as day. Well, who cares who he's interested in? What's he, when you come down to it? Just some stupid teacher. Then he paused, surveying Blaze's face, looking for chinks in his armour, acting as unfazed and bored as he could. I mean, I might not even be at Hogwarts next year. What's the matter if some fat old has-been likes me or not? Blaze blinked, and his thin, well-trimmed brow raised slightly just as Pansy turned around to gawk at Draco. He grinned a little at that, letting his head tilt slowly like a cat surveying its now attentive listeners. Well, you never know. I might have, moved on to bigger and better things. That took the wind right out of them. There was nothing else Draco could have meant. Nothing except the obvious. They, as expected, leapt into questions. However, Draco left them with nothing but a grin and a shrug. At least he had some respect from people. Bugger this Slughorn. Draco didn't need him. His bruised ego had entirely healed by the time they moved to dress into their robes. But then something extraordinarily peculiar happened. When Goyle moved to reach out for his trunk, it seemed to hit something with a rather dull smack, followed immediately by an eerily familiar yelp. Then the flash of light made just a little bit more sense as realization dawned upon him as the train neared the station. He couldn't help the grin that crept across his face as the others began filing out, turning back to check for him. "You go on," he said coolly, bashing down the mix of glee and terror bubbling up inside him. "Incarcerus!" he shouted, throwing the hex at the empty space of the luggage compartment. There was a loud crash, followed by another rattling bang as a flailing body flunked hard against the floor. "Malfoy!" snapped the struggling invisible figure. Draco nudged the jittering pile of nothing with his toe of his boot before leaning down and flinging the cloak of Harry Potter. "Thought so," muttered Draco, eyeing Harry properly. He was struggling in his bindings, lips split and nose bloody, probably broken, Draco assumed. Draco watched curiously as the body rose into a sitting position to glare up at him with those preposterously ludicrous spectacles. "Bloody hell, Malfoy!" Harry snapped again, shaking his head with a fury of black tangles. Draco smirked, leering down over Potter. "How sweet, Potter. Didn't know you missed me that much." Harry shook his head again as if trying to fix his broken nose with a quick shake. "I heard what you're up to, Malfoy. I'm going to Dumbledore about it." "Yes, Potter, please do. Tell Dumby all about what I'm plotting." "Which is what exactly?" he asked with mock curiosity. "You didn't hear anything I care about. Don't worry your speckled head about it." "Bet you care that I know about Borgin and Burke's." Draco's blood ran cold at that. All his thoughts seemed to evaporate from his mind as he stood blankly staring at Potter. And then, without really meaning to, Draco's foot came forward at its own volition and slammed into Potter's already bleeding nose. "That's for my father," he said in a rasp, as Harry's head flew back to collide with the floor once more. "And you didn't see anything at Borgin and Burke's, or I wouldn't be here right now, would I?" And for good measure, Draco emphasized his point by kicking Potter in the ribs, earning an annoyed yelp of pain. You think you're so great, don't you, Potter? The chosen one. Bet you loved having that old oaf fawning over you. He wouldn't know real greatness even if it was staring him right in the face. Potter grunted something back, though Draco couldn't hear him, not with the heat rushing to his ears. Blood began to pool down his chin, staining his light blue tea. If Draco hadn't let his thoughts of Potter seeing him in Borgin and Burke's, maybe he would have noticed the magical bindings around Potter's torso begin to loosen and fade. Perhaps he may have even noticed his left hand subtly reaching across the floor to his wand. Maybe, though, Draco was never the most practical or focused when it came to Harry Potter. Rictus Emperor! Draco barely had time to cast a shoddy shield charm, blocking the spell enough but sending him rocketing backwards, tripping over his own feet as the shards of magical glass flew through the air around his face. He came a little more prepared when Potter threw a stupefy his way, ducking down as flashes of red bounced off the compartment door, giving him just enough time to cast a strong Expelliarmus that Potter had no chance of dodging. His wand was flying into the air at lightning speed, and then Potter did something unexpected. Though, a note here, that almost everything Potter ever did was unpredictable. So, this act in itself should have, in a way, been expected to Draco. Draco's body slammed against the floor with such ferocity, Draco thought for a moment that Potter had cast some extremely powerful wandless spell, until he noticed that Potter was on top of him and had tackled him like some unkept rabid muggle, his fist jabbing into Draco's gut as the burning pain rippled through his body. Draco finally realized how crazed and soiled Potter truly was. It was filthy. He was fighting like a muggle. Honestly, the mere profanity of it, acting as if Draco was just some muggle at a bar fight. That's for your aunt, for my godfather, growled Potter as a string of spit and blood splattered on Draco's chin. Draco grabbed him by the back of his matted, overgrown black hair and pulled hard, using the distraction to allow his knee to jab sharply into Potter's groin. Rolling them over with all the weight he had, he landed a square punch to Potter's cheekbone. Draco instantly realized his mistake as real, searing pain exploded through his knuckle as he did his best to slide off Potter, aching hand in his grip, and attempt to distance them through his intense pain. Potter, seeing no such need for space, crawled over to him, 2 hands on his black lapels, as Draco sent a silent plea that his favourite suit would not rip. Draco was expecting it the next time. Harry threw a blunt punch to his stomach, and was eternally grateful that Potter had not thought to mar Draco's face. Draco's elbow collided with Potter's ear as his head fell momentarily into Draco's chest. And then came a rumble from beneath them both, the slow, dawning realization that the train was beginning to move. They sprung off each other at once, Draco injured and fumbling for his trunk as Harry began to open the compartment door, the both of them clambering out, dashing down the long compartment hall. "We can make it!" bellowed Potter as the train slowly began to pick up speed, steadily pushing through the station. "Here!" Harry insisted, presumably talking to himself, as he threw the main door open, displaying the windy, moving platform. Potter steadied himself and then, with a deep breath, jumped, hitting the floor with a thunk, his body rolling over sideways. Draco didn't have much time, following Potter's lead, gripping his trunk in hand, watching as the station moved faster and faster, and then, closing his eyes, jumped. It hurt, a lot more than the bashing from Potter did, as his temple collided with the stone with a hard thwack. Groaning, he tried to sit back on his knees, twisted uncomfortably beneath him. "You alive?" the Saviour asked, striding over to where Draco was crumpled over his trunk. "Just peachy, Potter," Draco said, trying his best to keep his words together, no matter how dazed and pained he was feeling. Then, slowly, he raised his head properly, feeling the hot dampness across his forehead. "Blimey, Malfoy, stuck with that landing, didn't you?" Potter was laughing, a cold sneer of a laugh that Draco despised. "Bugger off," was all he could spit, attempting to get to his feet, refusing to allow Potter, of all people, to see him weakened. Yet his newly bruised body gave no inclination of wanting to move, so he found himself lurched forward once more as his legs gave out. "Hey, you good?" Harry was saying now, touching him, a strong hand on his shoulder, keeping him from collapsing. Before Draco had a chance to protest, he was being heaved up by those strong hands. His ribs gave a sharp ache as he stumbled back into Potter's chest. "Don't be a wuss," Potter grunted as Draco let out a soft whine in pain as his arm was heaved over Potter's shoulder to support his body weight fully. "Thanks to you, I think we missed the carriages." "Thanks to me?" Draco sneered into Harry's damp throat, stumbling as Harry began to walk. He was slow, limping slightly from his fall, but he was big enough that Draco's smaller body wasn't difficult to steer. He hated being close to Potter like this. It made the ghost of his fourth-year self rise in him and giddy at the touch. If he had a chance to go back in time and smack that version of Draco across the face, he would. Snap him out of those teenage feelings that only come back to embarrass him in the future. "If you hadn't decided to perv on my friends and me, then we wouldn't be in this situation, now would we?" "Do you want to crawl back to school?" Draco didn't answer. Instead, he tripped on a loose tree root as they entered the forest. He held tighter onto Harry's shoulder, but found it no use as the both of them lurched forward into the dirt. Draco let out a yell as his robe soaked into the mud, and he was trapped under Harry's horizontal body. "Merlin, Malfoy, watch it!" he snapped, hurrying to his feet, then groaning. "Come here," he said, looking down at Draco with a glare, his arms outstretched. "Wrap your arms around my neck." "I think not," Draco snapped, slipping further into the mud at the shock of Harry's statement. "What? It's quicker if I just carry you. Don't make a fuss. It's cold and I'm sore and now soaked in mud." "Absolutely not!" Draco gasped, attempting to stand on his own, still failing, slipping back into the mud, this time getting it on his face. "I'm not a girl, Potter. I'm not some damsel in distress. I'm not your she-weasel." Harry scowled, snorted, and started to walk past him. "Wait, Potter!" Potter paused, a soft smile on his lips. "Yes, Malfoy?" "You can help me," he said softly, refusing to look at Potter's stupid mug as he approached, leaning down, wrapping his arms around Draco. Draco groaned but linked his arms around Harry's neck so he could be lifted. Harry let out a soft grunt, pulling Draco up, one arm on Draco's back, the other beneath his knees. "You're lighter than you look," said Harry, starting to move. Draco ignored this, instead decided to glare at Harry's mud-stained shirt. This was undoubtedly the most embarrassing situation he'd ever been in. And once he'd been transfigured into a ferret and shoved down someone's pants. "I swear, Potter, if you tell anyone about this, I'll kill you." Potter laughed at that, and Draco could feel his entire body shudder with it. Merlin, this was 14-year-old Draco's wet dream realized. He wanted to keel over and die. They were in silence for the rest of the journey, ignoring his strange contact, even as he felt his head stop swimming in pain. Draco forced himself to stay silent. It was all too weird, and he was freezing and Potter was so warm. He sighed, closing his eyes, taking a deep breath into Potter's skin before falling lax. That was Chapter 1 of They Told Me Everything Just Like Daddy Should, written and read by Badwriterrr. And a special thank you to Artsy Ho on AO3 for betaing this chapter. If you want to support me, the author and the reader, then please check out my Ko-fi on the description below, as well as my Tumblr and my AO3. I don't need jack shit from you, so when I speak, you bet your life my words are true.